Most people get bloody murdered. They stay that way. Not this one. He comes back.
As if literally nothing changed. Jon Snow went a bit wrong in the show Game of Thrones, especially compared to his book counterparts. The easy thing to say is just that Jon used the phrases,
"We need more
allies."
And...
Many allies.
And...
Powerful allies. But more importantly, we need allies.
and "You're my queen" too often, which is true, but also the problem obviously goes deeper than that and stretches back earlier. And I wanted to talk about it all. Basically, I've made other similar videos like this on different characters from Game of Thrones, and the big character analysis video I was planning to have finished this weekend is too big to finish in time. So I switched to doing this in the meantime. What damaged Jon Snow as a character, what were the causes, and what can we learn from them? Settle yourselves in for a quick shot of some water and a train, and then we'll get going. If we go all the way back to season 1, I'd say I quite like Jon's story there. He's a young, mostly innocent boy caught up in heroic ideals, wanting to join the Night's Watch as a noble duty, only to then learn that it's less than ideal and less than noble. His arc is about adjusting to that, questioning ideas of heroism, and then committing himself to the Night's Watch. It's not perfect. I'd have liked to see Jon discovering leadership skills more organically, having him gradually win around his friends like Gren and Pip, but let's not be pedantic, it's pretty good. It draws on a contrast between wanting to go off like a Stark and fight in some glorified idea of their battles, or instead committing himself to a long, less than glorious winter travelling beyond the Wall. It kinda lays the groundwork for the idea that being a hero isn't as straightforward as the ideals make it seem. And then season 2 of the show builds on this. They travel to Craster's Keep and discover the Watch is working with a less than good man who marries his own daughters and donates his sons to the White Walkers. The Night's Watch are sworn to protect the innocent, and Sam wants to help a girl named Gilly, but they can't. The conventional thing for the time would be killing Craster and freeing his children, but it's politically not as simple as that. And Jon is unsettled by this. I quite like the way the show uses this when he then meets Mance Rayder. Captured by the Wildlings and forced to convince them that he wants to join their ranks, he uses this argument about the Night's Watch not stopping Craster. It's quite a nice touch which fleshes out Jon's struggle with honour and heroism in a decent enough way when you can't use internal monologue and reflection the way the books do, but for me, things kinda go wrong just before this, when Jon kills Corin Halfhand, the famed ranger of the Night's Watch who has been fighting the Wildlings for years. Jon ends up getting them both captured, and so Corin wants Jon to kill him, to stage a bust up between the two so Jon can kill him in combat in order for the Wildlings to think Jon is on their side, for them to believe he wants to join them. The problem is, Corin is never set up enough as a character, and never really talks with Jon about the plan to effectively become a spy within the Wildlings. In the books he tells Jon he needs to do this, and we see Jon's conflict about that, being a crow in disguise as a wildling, who then slowly comes to respect the Wildlings. Where in the show, I think they wanted to keep Jon's motives more unclear here. Kinda want you to think Jon might actually be keen to become a wildling here for the sake of drama. Denying us a proper conversation between him and Corin, you instead feel Jon already likes the wildlings. That he's quite happy to join them from the get-go, and it's only much later he happens to break away when it's the right time. It's more tense, I suppose, if you think he might actually want to join them, but it denies any development because he's then not learning from the wildlings, not slowly coming to appreciate them more and more. He's sort of just milling about, having some good scenes with Tormund or Ygritte, but mostly just waiting for the time to break away. We'll discuss this more in a moment, but more importantly for now, Corin isn't really mentioned again. Sure, they talk of Jon killing him as an example of his skill and commitment to the wildlings, but Jon never reflects on it, and that's odds. This is a moment where following the Night's Watch, following his duty and honour, means actually killing someone from the Night's Watch. It means doing something incredibly dishonourable and unheroic for the sake of a bigger picture. This moment should again be testing Jon's concepts of morality and heroism. Even more, the reason Jon had to kill his fellow crow is because when he was tasked with executing the wildling Ygritte, he couldn't do it. She ran, and then they got lost, and then the wildlings captured all of them. Sparing Ygritte kinda meant all the other Night's Watch in his group got killed. Was that a good thing? You know, built into the story and built into the plot is this setup that Jon's worldview is being tested. His morality is becoming less rigid, more grey and unclear, but then that never happens in the show. We get a disconnect between the events of the plot and Jon's character, because he doesn't become more morally grey and less rigid. Despite experiences like this, he remains the honour-bound Jon Snow who does the conventionally heroic stuff, even though the events of the plot should be testing this, and I think this is the first real point in the story where we see that disconnect properly occurring. Once this disconnect does occur, once these two roads start forking, it becomes harder and harder to connect them again. And then what you end up with is one of my least favourite arcs from the entire show. But before I tell you what that is, we need to mention World Anvil.
A letter for you, Lord Commander.
I'm not Lord Commander anymore. To the traitor Ambassador Jon Snow.
You are entitled to 51% off World Anvil.
Come and see.
World Anvil. Yep, they sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that slew of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! Similar to the book, the Night's Watch on their return from ranging stay again at Craster's Keep, but their numbers have dwindled, they're starving, they're cold. It kinda leads to a mutiny in which both Craster and then Jeor Mormont are killed. As a plot point, it makes perfect sense. We get why this happens. The show tries to streamline things by converging this plot point with Bran's, with the minor villain Locke, and then Jon's arc of returning to defeat them all. I can see the sense to that. The problem is, defeating Karl Tanner of the Mutineers is not a satisfying arc for Jon Snow. One, because Karl Tanner is presented as villainous as they can possibly make him, a little like a budget Ramsay, and Jon is also given as convenient and understandable a reason as they can for him to travel off and defeat Karl Tanner. He needs to die because Jon previously lied to the Wildlings about the number of troops at the wall. If the Wildlings reach Karl Tanner first and they learn the truth of how few Night's Watch there are, they won't delay in attacking the wall. Therefore, they need to kill Karl Tanner before the Wildlings can find and interrogate him. Again, it makes plot sense, but you can feel the story bending to accommodate Jon Snow doing heroic things, going off to slay a very villainous villain and getting to look good in the process. This is opposed to Jon going off to do something that maybe wouldn't be conventionally heroic, that maybe tests his morality and his honour, or tests his duty to the Watch, like in the books when he seeks to help Alice Karstark, risking political tensions in the process, or he abandons his post at the Watch entirely to ride out and help what he thinks is Arya Stark. Rather than creating conflict about who Jon is and what his role is, the show instead makes it very easy for him to be heroic, support the Watch, and be heralded as a good guy all in one go. And then, what is his arc? It's pretty boring if he just gets to do good things all the time. Increasingly he becomes this fixed character, just a cardboard cutout of honour and loyalty and heroism, therefore making it harder to do anything with him, so the storylines become increasingly contrived as they try to accommodate his character. It's a slippery slope that literally ends with the cardboard cutout spouting stock phrases on repeat. What about the Wildlings though? You know, I mentioned earlier that Jon Snow's motives are kept distant to us when he first joins the Wildlings, because it makes it more dramatic if we think he might truly want to join them. The problem is, this means we don't get any kind of arc where he's learning to appreciate the Wildlings and their philosophy. Because it's kind of assumed he already appreciates them, you get a lot less scenes of Ygritte teaching him things, or Tormund, or Mance. Without going through a strong enough beat of learning their approach and their perspective, Jon Snow then never feels like someone who becomes half Wildling. He just feels like a member of the Night's Watch who happens to like Tormund and Mance and fell in love with Ygritte. I think about this when we get to the end of Season 8 and Jon is sent beyond the wall to live the rest of his days with the Wildlings, and in principle that could be a nice idea. Becoming like a Wildling could be a fitting conclusion, but in execution, the show has never had Jon behave at all like a Wildling. He's been confined to emulating Ned Stark at all times, so does he belong out there? Surely Winterfell or the Night's Watch are more fitting. Also, why are the Wildlings beyond the wall again? Are they choosing to live out in this harsh tundra now? Is that what they want? Are the Night's Watch still dedicated to keeping the Wildlings out despite them largely setting aside their differences to fight the White Walkers? I'm a little confused about the details of this plot point. Jon is, in my opinion, never enough like a Wildling, and this is a problem even more so for the whole long beat of the story where he's trying to unite the Wildlings and the Night's Watch. Because Jon can never convincingly present the Wildling philosophy, there's then no weight to a conflict where he's torn between the two, between the Watch and the Wildlings. As a result, the conflict becomes a much more shallow, we've fought the Wildlings for years, we don't want them here, versus the argument, we need more allies. Which is true, but that's not much weight or complexity, you know? It's not a complicated cultural clash and a muddle of politics going on. Combine that with the fact the only developed characters who oppose Jon here are a man who has always hated him and who the audience have been taught to see like a bit of a dick, then Janos Slynt, and then a child whose parents were killed by the Wildlings. Two are people we were pre-programmed to dislike and disagree with anyway, and the other is a kid. It's not much of a political force to clash with Jon. Consider the books. Jon never becomes Lord Commander because he's the biggest badass hero. He wins by a thin margin. He's not universally supported besides a few people who are presented as dicks. Jon then sends some of his most influential allies to other castles or to Hardhome, meaning he's left politically vulnerable to those who were never convinced by him. Plus, even some people he does respect turn against him, like Bowen Marsh. Not because he hates Jon, but because he believes it's right for the Watch for a myriad of reasons, including appointing someone baseborn as the new steward, marrying Alice Karstark to a wildling, planning to fight Ramsay Bolton when the Watch is supposed to be neutral. The show doesn't want to do any of that because it means exploring morality again, having Jon do things that could be questionable or make mistakes politically. It means exploring a tightrope walk between doing what's right and doing what keeps your supporters on board. The show prefers an unquestionably heroic Jon with clear antagonists set up to accommodate rather than challenge his heroism. Therefore, we end up with a very dull and simplified version of all of this. So perhaps then another bad moment is Jon's murder. I personally don't think it ever feels that tragic because it also kind of feels a bit stupid that they're just killing him here. You can understand why they do it in the books, but here it just feels a bit like, how is that going to help anything? And all of this is painfully similar to the Daenerys conflict. Jon dies, and it's a get-out-of-jail-free card which allows him to leave the Watch, fight Ramsay, see Sansa, and become king in the north. There are other problems here, but most of them I think are also to do with Ramsay. After all of this, Daenerys appears and creates a conflict of people arguing, I don't trust this foreign ruler with a foreign army, and Jon arguing, we need more allies. Just like the Wildling conflict all over again, we've already been through this. Admittedly, it could be interesting. North finally winning independence only for Jon to cede it to an invader with dragons who happens to be the daughter of the Mad King. There could be a lot of developed arguments for why people are concerned. It could tie into Sansa's dynamic with Jon. We could have Daenerys being presented more questionable at this point in the story rather than saving it till later. We could really be putting Jon in a kind of sticky situation just like the one that previously got him killed. You know, use that and have this time Jon learn from the mistakes of his previous death, although it wasn't really his fault in the show. Instead, the focus is absorbed by the romance. You can avoid a lot of the political tension by just having Jon fall in love, and therefore that's the main motivation to support Daenerys. She's my queen. Don't get me wrong, you could do an arc of Jon turning a blind eye to all concerns because he's fallen in love with Daenerys. You could do that, and it could kind of work. He put his duty before his love to Ygritte, and she died, and it tore Jon up. Perhaps he doesn't want to lose someone else again. Perhaps he considers love over duty, and that frustrates the hell out of his supporters, creating tension. I suppose that could work. However, Jon falls in love with Daenerys pretty abruptly. There isn't much personal feeling behind their chemistry. It just feels a little contrived and overly sentimental, and I think that then becomes something of a black hole that consumes all possible complexity in place of the sentimental romance. Not to mention they need her dragons to fight the White Walkers, therefore it's just quicker if they fall in love and become a couple. So this moment here creates a lot of problems too. Then Daenerys burns everyone, Tyrion has to convince Jon to kill her, and he does it. All of that quite quickly. Now what happens? If they really want Jon's story to end with him in exile beyond the wall, if they want that, I think there's two approaches. Either everyone has to hate Jon, and he's forced into exile as a punishment despite doing the right thing, killing Daenerys. Honour and heroism ends as a sacrifice of his honour. I suppose that could work, although it's also kind of hard when a lot of the people here agree with Jon, and are his family, see him as an heir to the throne. His main critic is Grey Worm, who isn't someone you'd think carries too much influence at a council of Westerosi leaders. Or you could do the reverse of that. Everybody likes Jon, everybody wants him to rule, however he sentences himself to exile out of guilt and self-hatred for killing the person he loved. For that to be satisfying, I think you needed to have Jon actually want to rule, instead of constantly insisting he doesn't want to throughout the entire story. I think you'd need him much earlier wanting to rule, and doing so in a morally grey way that on the one hand proves effective, and on the other he horrifies himself with some of his actions. Ruling at such a difficult time would have to leave him so torn up about his actions and the kind of darker decisions we see Book Jon starting to make, that then deciding to put himself into exile makes some kind of character sense. But again, that would mean presenting Jon as someone not always conventionally heroic. And the show hasn't set that up, so if the show has to do one of those things, but neither quite works for the reasons I've just mentioned, what we get instead is a kind of tepid, flimsy sort of middle ground between the two, where it's kind of a bit like both but not really either, and therefore there isn't much meaning to it. It doesn't commit to anything. It's a whimper of a conclusion to a character that has already fizzled out long ago. And off the back of that, I could definitely mention the Stannis moment where he says he doesn't want to be a Lord of Winterfell, because that kind of spirals. I could have mentioned Locke, I could have mentioned how we lack some of the dark decisions Jon makes in the book, the lack of warging, Ollie, his resurrection. Oh, I haven't even mentioned the Night King, have I? I suppose I talked about the Night King in my Arya video though. This feels like a good stopping point. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what I missed or got wrong. Let me know whatever you want me to know. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon. But otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Grace, Luke Orr, Treat You Caber, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.